My name is Peyton. I'm sitting alone at a quiet cafe on a chilly evening. The small place is tucked away from the noisy streets, and the fact that nobody here knows my name feels like a true blessing. I stir my coffee slowly, watching the steam rise and fade into the air, lost in thought about how far I've come from the girl who once begged to be seen, heard, and loved. It all started at a family dinner. I can still vividly remember the sound of laughter bouncing off the walls that night, yet I felt like I was in a completely different world. My father, Henry, a successful but cold-hearted businessman, had a sharp and dismissive voice that cut through the noise like a knife. "You're nothing. Stop pretending you're important," he said, not even bothering to look at me. My older brother Ethan, always eager to add salt to the wound, chuckled and chimed in, "To be honest, we forget you exist most of the time." My hand tightened around the fork, the polished silver digging into my fingers. I looked around the table at the faces I knew so well, but they had never truly seen me. I knew this moment would come someday, but I never expected it to hurt so deeply. I could feel the heat rising in my chest and the stinging behind my eyes, that familiar sign before the tears. But this time, I refused to let them see my weakness. I was no longer the girl who craved their approval. Slowly, I lifted my fork and gently clinked it against my glass. The clear sound sliced through the air, drawing everyone's eyes in the room to me. I stood up, my heart pounding so hard that it almost drowned out the murmurs of confusion. "This won't take long," I said, my voice surprisingly steady and stronger than I thought possible. "Just 3 sentences." As I paused, the silence stretched out. I watched the smirks on their faces fade and confusion settle in. I wasn't the weak-willed girl they remembered. I wasn't the desperate daughter or sister anymore. I had spent years swallowing my pride, constantly second-guessing my worth, and begging for scraps of affection that they had no intention of giving. Memories flooded my mind like cruel little movies. I remembered my 12th birthday when my family went on a trip without me, leaving me at home alone. They said it was because I had a school project, but I knew it was just an excuse. I also recalled the time I graduated from high school with honors, and they didn't even show up. They claimed they were too busy at work. I remembered waiting by the window on Christmas Eve when I was 10, holding a handmade gift for my parents. They promised they'd be home early, but they never came. Each of these tiny moments had built a wall between us, brick by brick, until now, when I finally stood on the other side, no longer needing them to cross over. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting, puzzled, and maybe a bit annoyed. Good. Let them wonder. Let them experience this discomfort for once. I had carried the weight of their rejection for so long that it had transformed me into someone far stronger than they could ever understand. This wasn't about revenge in the loud, screaming way they might expect. It was about truth, about quietly reclaiming the parts of myself that they had tried so hard to convince me were worthless. The fork still trembled slightly between my fingers, but my voice remained firm. 3 sentences were all I needed. I took a slow breath, feeling years of hurt and hope swirling inside me. This wasn't anger speaking, it was survival, freedom, and finally stepping out of their shadows into my own light. My first sentence was simple yet carried the weight of years. "I've loved this family with every part of me that you deemed unworthy." The words fell heavily into the room, and for a moment, no one moved. I watched as my father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes narrowing as if trying to find a joke in my words. There was none. Not tonight. Tonight, I wasn't the punchline. After a moment of silence, I spoke the second sentence, the one that cut deeper than anything else. "And after tonight, you'll never have to pretend to remember I exist again." My mother, Lily, a woman who always put on a perfect facade but was emotionally distant, went pale instantly. The color drained from her face so quickly that it almost startled me. My brother's mouth opened and then closed again, as if he wanted to say something sarcastic but couldn't find the words. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in their eyes. Not because I had threatened them or caused a scene, but because they realized they had lost something they had never bothered to value. A strange sense of peace washed over me. There was no rage, no sorrow, just a quiet acceptance that felt like stepping into fresh air after being locked in a suffocating room for years. I could have said more. I had so many bottled-up speeches that could have lasted a lifetime, but I didn't owe them my pain anymore. I owed it to myself to move forward without dragging their weight behind me. Slowly and deliberately, I placed the fork down beside my plate and gave a small, almost polite smile. It wasn't fake or forced, it was free. Without waiting for anyone to speak, I turned and walked away from the table. I didn't look back, not when my mother called my name softly, almost pleadingly. Not when my father slammed his hand against the table hard enough to rattle the silverware. Not when my brother muttered something under his breath. I just kept walking, each step feeling lighter than the last. As I reached the door, I paused for a second and said the third and final sentence, the one that sealed everything with a quiet, irrevocable closure. Take care of yourselves, because you'll never get another chance to take care of me. The door clicked shut behind me, and I knew without a doubt that for the first time in my life, I had truly chosen myself. The night air hit my face like a blessing, crisp, cool, and alive. I stood on the porch for a moment, letting the distant noise from inside fade away. It was so strange how a house could be filled with so much noise yet feel so empty at the same time. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have some grand strategy mapped out. All I knew was that I couldn't keep playing a role in their broken family drama anymore. I wasn't their scapegoat, their invisible daughter. I was something more, something they didn't deserve to know. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't need to look to know it was them. Probably my mother trying to smooth things over with hollow apologies that would only make her feel better, not me. Or maybe my brother with one of his half-hearted jokes, pretending it had all been a misunderstanding. I didn't even pull it out. I just put it on airplane mode and tucked it deeper into my jacket pocket. Silence. It felt like power now, not loneliness. I walked slowly down the steps, my shoes crunching against the gravel driveway. I remembered being a kid, running down this same driveway with skinned knees and untied shoes, eager to catch up with my brother, eager to be part of whatever he was doing, even if it meant being teased or ignored. Just being included used to feel like a win. What a small life I had lived for so long without even realizing it. I reached my car, unlocked it, but didn't get in right away. I stood there with the door open, breathing in and out, letting the cool night air fill my lungs, and feeling the weight of 1,000 invisible expectations lift off my shoulders piece by piece. I thought about the time I graduated from college. I had worked so hard, and no one from my family came. They gave some lame excuse about being too busy. I also thought about all the birthday parties they forgot, the milestones they downplayed, and how every family photo seemed to crop me out halfway. I had convinced myself so many times that their love wasn't something I needed to measure my worth. And that night, finally, I stopped asking for crumbs at a table that was never set for me in the first place. A small, honest laugh escaped my lips. It wasn't bitter or angry, it was just relief. I got into the car, started the engine, and watched the house shrink smaller and smaller in my rearview mirror. There were no tears blurring my vision, no regrets clawing at my chest. There was only a wide open road ahead and a heart that finally beat for itself. That night wasn't the end of my story, it was the beginning. I knew deep down that they would remember this night for the rest of their lives. The night they realized the one person they thought would always come crawling back didn't. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into a strange, aching quiet. At first, I thought I might feel the urge to reach out. Maybe some sense of obligation would drag me back into their orbit, but nothing came. No phone calls, no half-hearted texts, only silence. And that silence spoke louder than any argument could. At first, it stung. Sitting alone in my small apartment on Sunday afternoons, when family dinners used to be mandatory, I would feel the ache. Not for them, but for the idea of them. The idea that somewhere out there was a version of my family where I was loved, seen, and celebrated. But that version had never been real, and grieving it still hurt. I filled my days with work, small joys, and rebuilding the pieces of myself I hadn't even realized were missing. Little by little, I noticed how much lighter I felt without their constant judgment weighing on my chest. There was so much more room to breathe without constantly trying to shrink myself into the version of me they might have approved of. Sometimes late at night, I'd scroll through old family photos. In nearly every picture, I could see how I was always slightly apart, always looking in, never quite fitting in, always the extra, never the star. How had I convinced myself for so long that it was normal? One night, after a long day at work, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, staring out at the city lights, and finally allowed myself to remember it all, not with anger, but with clarity. I remembered the time my brother got a brand new car for his 18th birthday, and I got a simple card. I remembered the Christmas when my gifts were an afterthought, and my mother joked that I was hard to shop for because I was so distant. I realized that I wasn't broken or unlovable. I just loved people who couldn't love me back the way I deserved. The freedom that came with that realization was so sharp it almost hurt. It was like stepping out of a dense fog and seeing the sun for the first time. One evening, as I was organizing old files on my laptop, I found a letter I had written to my family a year ago but never sent. It was raw and angry, filled with accusations and heartbreak. I read it with a strange, detached curiosity. The person who had written that letter was still inside me, but she wasn't in control anymore. I didn't need them to hear my side, to apologize, to understand, or to change. Their silence was answer enough. But a part of me still wanted closure, a final act, not for them, but for myself. I thought back to that dinner. I remembered my father's sneer, my brother's mocking laughter. I remembered how they stared at me, confused and amused, when I tapped my fork against the glass and asked for a moment of attention. I had said I needed just 3 sentences, and they had only heard 2. It was time for the third. The next morning, I woke up to a sky heavy with gray clouds. It felt like they were pressing down on me, making me move slower and think deeper. I didn't rush. I made my coffee, sat by the window, and watched the city go about its business. Life went on outside, uncaring and untouchable. And for once, I felt the same way. I didn't want revenge in the traditional sense, the kind where you scream and slam doors and demand apologies. I wanted something quieter, a line drawn in the sand, a way to say, without shouting, that they had lost me. I opened my phone and scrolled to our old family group chat. It had been silent for months, except for the occasional meme my brother sent that no one responded to. I stared at it for a long time. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, but no words came. They didn't deserve my words. Instead, I clicked the small Leave Group button. It asked if I was sure, and I was. The moment it was done, a strange calm settled over me. There was no grand fanfare, no cinematic closure. Just peace, a tiny, quiet liberation. But I wasn't finished yet. I found an old photo of me from a family barbecue years ago. In the photo, I was sitting on the edge of the patio, half in shadow, half in sunlight. I was forgotten, barely in the frame. I had saved it not because it was a good memory, but because it reminded me of the truth. I uploaded it to my social media with a short caption, "Sometimes, the best thing you can do is stop sitting where you were never invited to be seen." No tagging, no names. Just the truth floating out there, quiet but unmissable. Minutes after posting, my phone started buzzing. Messages from extended relatives, aunts, and cousins I hadn't spoken to in months. Some asked if I was okay, others sent hearts or short, understanding responses like, "Proud of you" or "Took me years to learn that, too." Not a single message from my parents or my brother. And somehow, that made it even more perfect. Their silence was more honest than any apology could have been. I spent the rest of the day doing things for myself. I took myself out to lunch, something I used to be too self-conscious to do alone. I bought a new book. I walked aimlessly through the city, letting the rhythm of my footsteps drown out the last lingering ghosts of their voices in my head. As the sun started to set, I found myself standing on a bridge overlooking the river. The water moved slowly, endlessly, never looking back. Neither would I. It's strange how grief and freedom can coexist. I could mourn what I never had while celebrating the fact that I finally stopped chasing it. I leaned on the railing and let the wind whip through my hair, feeling lighter than I had in years. In that moment, I promised myself that I would not let the people who had made me feel small dictate the size of my dreams anymore. I would not waste my life trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. And most of all, I would never again apologize for existing. The third sentence I had promised at that dinner wasn't for them to hear, it was for me to live. It had taken me years to realize that some families aren't built on love, but on expectation and obligation. And it had taken me even longer to understand that walking away wasn't giving up, it was choosing myself. Finally, days turned into weeks, and life moved on, beautifully indifferent to the weight I had shed. I found myself laughing more easily, sleeping more deeply. The heavy ache that had lived just beneath my ribs for years had loosened its grip. And in its place, there was room to breathe, to dream, to exist without apology. I started taking small steps toward the life I had once thought was beyond me. I enrolled in classes I had long put off, ones that made my heart race with excitement. I decorated my tiny apartment with things that felt like me, warm lights, messy art, books stacked in uneven towers. My world wasn't perfect, but it was mine, finally and entirely. Yet, there were moments when the past tugged at me, like a stubborn ghost. It whispered in my quieter hours, reminding me of the girl I used to be, the one who sat quietly at family gatherings, shrinking into the corners, hoping someone would notice, would see. Sometimes, I still wondered if they thought of me, if they regretted it. That answer came sooner than I expected. One rainy afternoon, as the city blurred behind streaks of water on my window, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but something inside me knew. I stared at it for a long moment before answering, my voice steady. It was my mother. Her voice, once sharp and dismissive, now trembled at the edges. She danced around the reason she called, making awkward small talk, like a stranger trying to find her footing in a foreign land. I listened quietly, not giving her anything to latch onto. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she sighed. Your father's birthday is coming up, she said. He mentioned you. We're having a little dinner. You should come. It would have been easy to think this was an olive branch, a small peace offering after years of hurt. But I wasn't naive anymore. I could hear the hollowness beneath her words. The way she phrased it, it was more like an obligation than a heartfelt wish. They didn't miss me, they missed the role I used to play, the quiet scapegoat, the emotional dumping ground, the invisible extra at their grand performance. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, letting the final pieces of clarity settle into place. I won't be able to make it, I said softly. There was a beat of silence. Oh, she replied, the disappointment clear in her tone. Maybe next time. There won't be a next time, I said, still calm, still kind, but with a firmness that she couldn't miss. I ended the call before she could respond. I sat there for a long while afterward, feeling the final threads snap free. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It didn't feel like loss, it felt like freedom. Later that night, as the rain finally stopped and the city lit up in reflections on the wet streets, I thought about the version of me who had once begged for their love, who had twisted herself into shapes too small to be seen, too quiet to be heard. She was gone now. In her place stood someone who didn't need their validation, their approval, or their company to feel whole. I had given them everything once, my loyalty, my love, my forgiveness, and they had tossed it aside like it was nothing. Now, I gave them nothing. Not anger, not hatred, just absence. And somehow, that absence echoed louder than any words I could have ever spoken. Weeks turned into months, and my absence from their lives became a presence of its own. The seat I used to occupy at family dinners stayed empty year after year. My name became something they couldn't mention.